Hey everyone, hope you're still reading these, or even seeing them. It's been an interesting little journey so far, and I thought it might be past time for an update. Gail and I have been traversing the stores, getting supplies and mapping the different setups, and I've seen more stores in the short time I've been with Gail than I have in all the time I was on my own. I've seen places where the shelves are made of smoke. I've seen places where the ceiling and the floor are reversed. I've even seen some stores I think might be on another planet. The languages vary in many of them, and some of them aren't even dialects I think are native to Earth. I've made some notes on them, and I hope to write them down for you a little later, but for now, I have to tell you about something that led me to think we might not be the only ones who can travel through intent. We had gone back to KK, practicing my movements, and I was getting ready to go to another one when Gail stopped me. "Something is wrong," he said. He was looking around as if he expected to see something obvious, but the answer wasn't quite that simple. The store wasn't what you would call in any kind of order, and it reminded me of the store that I had trashed. Shelves were moved, things were tossed around, and the mess was everywhere. Gail could talk about not wrecking the stores, but it appeared he had done just that on his own. As such, it took us a couple of minutes to notice that the sign in the window was missing. Someone had taken it down and torn it in half. Gail looked at the pieces in confusion, not sure what to make of it, but looked to the break room as if the culprit might still be there. They weren't, but they had left their handiwork behind. They had ripped the bulletin board down and smashed it on the floor. Gail stared at it as if someone had desecrated a grave, and I could see him trembling in barely contained rage. "Who's done this?" he whispered, his voice full of pain. "Who's torn up my board?" He picked it up, checking over the ruined front as I started looking for clues. There wasn't much to go off, but I did find a couple of things that the perpetrator had left behind. There were scraps of clothes that had gotten caught in the door when whoever it was had left. There were shoe prints on the wall under the spot where the board had been, the tread visible as if it had stepped in something gross. The last tied it all together, and the smell of it made me gag a little when it hit me. Someone had taken a dump in the floor near the manager's desk, and then trod through it on their way out. "Friggin' animals," I said, covering my nose as I took a step back. I bumped into Gail, and he seemed to have seen it too. He took the bulletin board back with him, but the damage was definitely done. I asked him if he had any idea who could have done this, but he didn't seem to have an answer. He sat looking at his little memorial, the corkboard the only reminder of his friends, and I wondered if he was going to be okay. Someone or something had gone in and wrecked his remembrance plaque. I say something because as far as I knew, we were the only people that could travel with any accuracy. If there were others, then why hadn't they found us yet? Or we them? I sat with him for a little while, hoping he would snap out of it, but after some time, I decided to leave him with his thoughts. I decided to go and find something to cheer him up, a nice meal or something sweet, and hopefully he'd be back to his old self. I was heading to WW, a very special place that I discovered before meeting Gail, but didn't entirely understand. When I first came to it, the floor didn't feel right, and the whole place smelled like food. When something dripped onto me as I stood studying it, I immediately went through again and stepped into XX. I told Gail about it after we met, and he laughed and offered to take me back. When he showed me the true nature of the place, I understood what a cool store I had run from. Here, I'll show you my journal entry, and maybe it'll shed some light on the situation. WW, Sweet Store. Designation, low to no danger. People none. Theme, dessert shop. WW is a store made entirely of dessert items. The shelves are made of chocolate, the floors are made of marzipan, and the ceiling drips with endless whipped cream. Everything there is edible. All the packages, the products, even the walls and the furniture are fit for consumption. It's a great place to find a sweet treat. Pretty cool, right? There really is a store for everyone. I closed my eyes and prepared to step through, wanting to grab something sweet, but as I came into the place, I thought I'd made a mistake. I still stepped into the wrong Dollar General about 20% of the time. I'm far from perfect, but as the overwhelming smell of chocolate assaulted my nostrils, I realized I'd gone to the right place after all. The walls, the shelves, the floor, they were all still made of confection, but their composition had changed drastically. Most of the shelves lay in chocolate shambles. The packages that were uneaten had been scattered and stomped on, their contents spread across the floor. The packages left smears across the ground, and the smears were worked deep into the marzipan. The ceiling was untouched, but it was a little bit out of reach. The mess was impressive, like some wild animal might do when cornered and trying to escape. I started looking for a source of all this destruction. It seemed similar somehow, like a place I'd seen before, and I felt the hairs prickle on my neck as I went. I found a candy cane, of all things, lying by the base of a shelf, and held it firmly between my hands as I went deeper into the store. As I rounded an aisle, I saw something scuttle out of sight. As my foot came down in an extra thick splat of whipped cream, I heard the skitter of something that ran along on all fours. I kept checking my peripherals, listening for the subtle scrape of feet, and when something finally lunged at me, I brought the hooked end of the candy bludgeon around and cracked the end on the face of my attacker. I brandished the broken tip, ready to fight whatever had come for me, but it was the last thing I expected to find sprawled on the floor. It was him. It was the hermit. He was righting himself, getting up on his hands and knees and hissing at me like a wild animal. His grimy clothes were smeared with chocolate, and his hands were caked with the store's leavings. He seemed more feral than he had the last time I'd seen him, and when he threatened to lunge again, I shoved the broken end of the candy cane at him, and he scampered back smartly. "Get back!" I yelled, and for a wonder, he did. He ran for the bathroom and plunged through the door, leaving the store in disarray and leaving me with questions. I traveled to XX, following on his heels, but he was nowhere to be found. There was no way he could travel like Gale and I could, but I suppose that would explain how he had gone to Gale's old store and messed up his board. It seemed impossible. The guy was crazy, but the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like it had to be him. Who else could it be? We'd encountered no one besides the hermit, and if it wasn't him, then the prospects seemed even more fearful. I went back to DGB-0 to give Gale the bad news, and found him seated at the desk we'd put together, and fixing his sign. "I ran into the hermit," I told him, when he didn't look up. "What the hell were you doing in FF in the first place?" he asked, putting down his tape and glancing over his shoulder. "I wasn't in FF," I said, hesitating a little as he looked up in confusion. "I was in WW. He's made a real mess of it." Gale sat back, and I could see that he had recreated the board as it had been when I'd first seen it. The warnings, the stories, the pages of remembrance to his old friends, they had all been lovingly recreated, and it did my heart good to see it restored. It deserved to be here. It was important to Gale, and we should protect it. "That doesn't make sense," Gale said. "He's never shown any inclination after leaving before. He's always stayed in FF for as long as I've known him." "Are you sure about that?" I asked. "When I showed up, there wasn't a lot of food left, and there's no way he's been living there all this time without a food source." Gale shrugged. "I never thought about it like that. Mostly I just avoided FF because that's where I've always encountered him. I guess he must be traveling. But how does he know how to get back is what I want to know. It's not impossible, but he's about half crazy. You can't tell me that guy could figure out how to travel with any real destination." "I don't know," I said. "How long has he been here anyway?" Gale scratched his head, looking like he was trying to puzzle out something difficult. "He was the first person I encountered when I set out traveling, and I'd been traveling for quite some time when I met him. I don't know if he was here before me, but I suspect that he might have been. I guess maybe he wasn't always crazy, but that's just speculation. Any rate, if he's wrecking up stores, we need to stop him. Like I told you once, there's no proof that the store or the resources they hold are infinite. If we're going to survive here, then we need to stop him from making that harder. What's the plan then, I asked. But that's where today's story ends. Gale and I are creating a plan to stop the old guy from wrecking up the stores, but it's something we have to approach carefully. He's crazy and dangerous, and if we don't want to get hurt or killed, then we can't go in half-cocked. Gale has started keeping a closer eye on the Dollar General, and we've started going into other stores with weapons. If he attacks us, we'll be ready. Hopefully we can take him alive. As promised, though, here's a couple of excerpts from my store journal. Hope you guys enjoy them. AA, the Upside Down Store. Designation, low danger. People, none. Theme, upside down. This store is like a regular store, only, well, upside down. The shelves stay on the ceiling, and the food doesn't fall off them and come up, so there must be some sort of weird gravity. Gravity doesn't seem to have reversed for us, however, so we walk on the ceiling and find all the shelves unreachable. Gale, however, suggested using a stepladder, and it's possible to reach high enough to pick some of the items down to us. The place makes me dizzy if I spend too much time there, and it's a real trip. S, the Street Store. Designation, moderate. People, shadow drivers. Theme, street fair. S is a perfectly normal street, with booths set up that have items. It's all inside, but the ground is concrete, and there's garbage cans and street lamps and graffiti in odd areas. The only real danger present is that sometimes cars drive up and down the road. They don't go very fast, and they're not hard to get out of the way of, but if they hit you, it could kill you or hurt you. The shadow people who drive them look like living shadows, and they don't get out, so there aren't any troubles there. As long as you stay off the center of the street, then you should be fine. The food is normal, but aside from the shelves, there are these odd little food stalls that just seem to have cooked food in them. You shout what you want into the stall, and they cook it, and you can watch it be made all by itself. It's wild, but a nice little change up from the norm. The stalls have a finite amount of resources, but if they run out of food, they'll put up a closed sign. There are 8 streets, and they have sidewalks beside the shelves. The cars don't seem to come from anywhere in particular, and don't seem to go anywhere either. The exit is a tunnel with a crossbar blocking it. I've talked to Gale about going into the tunnel and see what's on the other side, but he is staunchly against it. You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story, or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad and Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributors. Thanks to Saikat, Lee Kendall, Janet, and Chris Kinsella for being our spooky skeleton tier contributors. And of course, thanks to Xaronan, Winter, Tyler Parker, Stephanie Carrington, Sarah ASMR, Hi Stacy, Emily Coltsfoot, and Cinnamon Fox, and Bella Lee for being our ghostly reader tier contributors. Thanks everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. As I said, if you'd like to have your name read out at the end of every episode that I make, and maybe get a little more, come on down to Patreon and sign up, or become a member on YouTube. Ghostly Reader tier contributors get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. So, what are you waiting for? Come on down and give it a look. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.